Now, you know the story of my tallis, that this fabric represents the young women from a shelter in Kenya whose refugees, whose lives were torn apart and who lost their families, were themselves assaulted, and how through the support of the women who direct this shelter regain their lives, and that this fabric is fabric that they created. And you know that when I wear it, I carry these women on my shoulders in prayer, and I'm reminded of the work that I can do with my life, and so that I don't spend my days frivolously, but rather do what I can to make my own difference in this world. Well, Lesley Sachs is wearing the talit of Women of the Wall, and she, I'm sure, will talk about it a bit more. There are a couple of women in our congregation who have this talis too, and you have an opportunity, I'll just plug this for a moment, you have an opportunity, if you don't have a talit or you'd like a new one, to purchase it, and in the same way, to carry the women of Israel, all the women, whatever their religious connection, even secular women, because as Lesley's going to speak to us, the rights of women in Israel need a great deal of support. So I want to remind you that in December of 2012, I was detained at the Western Wall for having taken my talit, and as we came on Rosh Chodesh, the celebration of the new moon, we had been planning to come in. I walked in that morning with a knot and another friend, and we were simply planning to go to the wall and to pray. And as we drew near to the security gate, word spread that talises were no longer allowed. Suddenly, a new rule from the chief rabbi of the wall. So we took our talises, and some of the women wrapped them like scarves. I had on a ski jacket. It was a cold morning, and I just took my ski jacket and I zipped it up. So I got through security. Most of the women had their talises confiscated. I got through security and I went down to the wall, and really without thinking, I unzipped my jacket and I took my talis off and blessed it, and I put it on and began to pray. And a few moments later, 2 police persons came up and took me and 3 other women away. And I remember saying to the young female police officer, "How do you feel about what you're doing right now?" So this event and several others caused, of course, a tremendous shift in the Israeli public's reaction to what was happening, and so change has begun, but not enough. So I want to read to you, or just alert you to a couple of things following that time period. 2 months later, February 2013, 4 of the famous 1967 paratroopers who came and broke through to the wall, and you may remember that famous photograph of them touching the wall. They stood by with Women of the Wall, that Rosh Chodesh, with Lesley, and to affirm their right to be there and to pray and to do what we would do on Rosh Chodesh. And as soon as they departed, 4 women were arrested, and you were one of those. Right? There's a difference between arrest and detainment. I was only detained. Arrest is something very different. A few months later, in June, a 17-year-old yeshiva student from the West Bank posted on the internet, "Is it kosher to shoot someone at the Western Wall?" referencing the women who come to pray on Rosh Chodesh. In October, this past October 2014, Women of the Wall sponsored bus advertisements that focused on this concept of women having their bat mitzvah at the wall. You see all the boys who have their bar mitzvahs, so why not a girl to have a bat mitzvah at the wall? And so they began putting beautiful advertisements on the sides of buses, and over 50% of those advertisements were defaced by the ultra-Orthodox. So here's the mission of Women of the Wall. Our central mission is to achieve the social and legal recognition of our right as women to wear prayer shawls, to pray and read from the Torah collectively and out loud at the Western Wall. And you need to know that there's nothing in halakha that prohibits this, right? That there is nothing according to Jewish law that prohibits us from living as we want to as women, affirming God's presence in our lives and the role of Torah in our lives.
I will start in a few words about the talit. So the talit has the four mothers here, and it's very colorful. And I think in so many ways it represents women of the wall. We bring a different kind of taste, of color, of importance to the kotel. If you think about the black and white talit, which is the talit usually worn by men on the men's side, suddenly we have women on the women's side with colorful talitot, different. It's a bit like the orange on the seder plate. You all know the story. And I think that represents, in a way, also part of the battle of bringing change. The battle at the kotel is, on one side, very much a feminist battle, a battle which we are fighting for 4 T's. The talit, the tefillah, praying out loud, the Torah, which I'm going to be talking about, and the tefillin. Some of our women put the tefillin on. So we call it the 4 T's. Now, the emphasis on that battle changed over the years. The first years that the women of the wall were fighting, it was the voice. The men did not want to hear the women praying out loud in a group. You can pray quietly in the women's section, but every time we would pray as a group, sing Hallel, Shacharit, the men would go shh, shh, and the women as well. They didn't want to hear women's voices at the kotel. Then the emphasis turned to the talit, and that is when Rabbi Elise and there were 29 arrests all in all. Some of us were detained more than once. I was detained 4 times. Very unpleasant. Fingerprints. You feel a bit like a criminal. For wearing a talit at the kotel, one of my main messages today will be the importance of what you can do, and the fact that all of you both have the right, and you, in a way, you have an obligation to do something about this. The kotel belongs to all of us. The kotel does not belong to a small group of Haredi men and women, mainly men. And one of the problems is that in 1967, when we liberated the kotel, the keys for the kotel in many ways were given to an ultra-Orthodox rabbi. He was appointed for life. And when he passed away, he was, the man who took his place is Rabinovich, again for life. And he is a Haredi man, and he has turned the kotel in so many ways to an ultra-Orthodox synagogue. And we are fighting, and we are really fighting hard. It's a territorial battle. It's a battle for money, for funds. The Kotel Heritage Foundation has a huge budget to do many things, and amongst other things, education. And we feel that this has to change. And the fact that the paratroopers joined us shows the support that we have in Israel by so many Israelis who don't want to stand on a plastic chair and see their son having a bar mitzvah on the men's side. When I was a child, I grew up in Israel. I've been in Israel since the age of 5. And when I was at the Kotel just after 1967, a few months later, and then a year later, the mechitza was this high. It was up to my waist. And over the years, it became higher and higher. And over the years, also, the whole kotel became more and more ultra-Orthodox. Now, we all pray facing Israel. And in Israel, everybody prays facing Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, everybody prays facing the kotel. So the kotel belongs to all of us. Any one of you who goes to Israel, the kotel is as much his or hers as it is to any Israeli. I want to just recap a bit where women of the wall were just before the last elections and talk a little bit about what might happen we hope, after the elections. After the arrests, and this was already in 2013, April 2013, was the last arrest. I was arrested with another 4 women, and the police decided to turn, it was a detention, they wanted to turn the detention into an arrest so that we could be barred from coming into the kotel for 3 months. And so they took us to court. And what happened in court is really an interesting story. We were taken to court, and there was this woman judge. And the police officer said to her, "These women have been disturbing the public peace. They've been, adorning, wearing a talit and singing out loud." And she was looking, Sharon Larry Bavli, double surname, maybe she's a feminist. And she's looking, and she can't get it. These 5 women are sitting there. None of us look exactly like, criminals, to say the least. And she says to the officer, "I don't understand." Now, the police would film us every Rosh Chodesh. They were right in the women's section, and they would film it. So he said, "I can show you. I have it on film." And I remember like it was yesterday, he turned the computer towards her, and he showed her. And she looked, and what she saw was a group of women, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, praying together from the same Siddur. This is our Siddur, in English and Hebrew, praying beautifully together, singing Hallel. And then a group of ultra-Orthodox men shouting at us and, abusing, really swearing at us, and a few women. And she said to him, I don't get it. I see them, they don't look as if they're disturbing the peace. It's those who are shouting at them. The policeman said to her, "Yes, but it's because of them." And she just shouted at him and said, "That is like accusing a woman who's been raped with her own rape. I'm letting them free." And we were set free. But the police, thankfully, decided to appeal to a higher court. Now, here we were already a bit more worried because the penalty for wearing our talit and praying not according to the custom of the place could have been 6 months in prison or paying a fine. Of course, we would never have paid the fine. We would have gone to prison. So there we were in front of a new judge in a higher court. He was modern Orthodox, and we were a little bit worried. We had a lawyer, 2 lawyers, and they pleaded our case. And then the police gave their side, and we went home, and we were waiting for the verdict. And the verdict of Judge Moshe Sobel is a verdict that is now being studied in universities, a clear verdict analyzing the situation and saying that the women of the wall have the right to pray in the women's section with the 4 T's. It is halachically acceptable. The kotel belongs to them as well. And the state of Israel has never done what they had promised to do, and that is to turn Robinson's Arch, which I will talk about in a minute, into an alternative prayer section, which is dignified and that women of the wall could pray there. And from the month after that, that's in May, the police were protecting us. They were not arresting us. But we had tremendous opposition from the ultra-Orthodox. I remember 2 months following that, the rabbi of the wall had these huge loudspeakers. And exactly at 7 o'clock in the morning, when we started our tefillah, someone started in these huge loudspeakers, turned to us, reading, maybe it was Tehillim, maybe doing Shacharit, it's not clear to me, very loudly. So we couldn't hear ourselves. So again, we had to think, what are we going to do? Just like Rabbi Elise, put her jacket over the talit. Again, we had to think, okay, how do we have a prayer with these loudspeakers? So when you go to the sometimes to a museum, you have a guide speaking into a microphone and people have an earpiece. we had that so that we could have the tefillah together and hear ourselves. And, it feels that each time we have to think about a new way of, going around, instead of us being women who have the right to pray exactly like men in the women's section. Why not? This is crazy, and it's part of the whole issue of the lack of religious pluralism in Israel, because the Kotel belongs to all of us, each and every one of us. And we managed again for 2 months to bring in a tiny little Torah, which we got from England, 14 centimeters long. But again, we had to smuggle it in. We don't want to do that anymore. We want to be able to bring in the Sefer Torah, which we are permitted by law to bring in. But why can't we? In 2010, Rabbi Rabinovich put out a regulation. He can put out regulations in the Kotel, in the area of the Kotel. Don't spit, no beggars allowed, whatever. And he put out a ruling. No one can bring in a Sefer Torah because there are 100 Sifrei Torah in the men's section. So no one has to bring in a Sefer Torah, which means women of the wall cannot bring in a Sefer Torah. We said to him, fine. Legally, we have the right to read from the Torah. Bring us a Sefer Torah from the men's section. No, of course not. There's not even a question about that. So here we were in a catch-22. On the one hand, we are permitted to read from the Torah, and on the other hand, we can't get it in. The guards, every time we come with a Sefer Torah, they stop us. What can we do? So, we are exactly in this point of how do we materialize or fulfill or manage to read the Torah, have bat mitzvahs at the women's side. And that is one of our dreams, by the way, to have many, many bnot mitzvah come and have a bat mitzvah with women of the wall, but not only in the women's section. Read from the Torah, make something meaningful in that bat mitzvah. Many Israeli girls have what we call a bat mitzvush. That's just a party, nothing to do with religion. But we want to change that. And that is also one of our missions now, when we will be able to bring in the Torah. Now, things have been changing, and some of you know a bit about it. Thanks to the pressure from North America and the tremendous support that you have been giving us, Netanyahu, again in 2014, was approached by then the ambassador in the United States, Michael Oren, who said to him, Netanyahu, Bibi, you are losing support in North America. You have got to do something about women of the wall. Every time I or anyone from my office or anyone official from Israel goes to speak in front of a congregation, people get up and say, what is this story with women of the wall? You're arresting women with a talit, and we here in the United States pray with talitot. What's happening? This is unacceptable. And so Netanyahu turned to the head of the Sukhnut, of the Jewish agency, Natan Sharansky, and said, please go to the United States and solve this problem of women of the wall. And he came here, and he spoke with the heads of the movement, Reform, Conservative, and the federations, and he came up with a brilliant solution. They would build a continuation of the plaza down south, over Robinson's Arch, which is now, it's a continuation of the Kotel, but at the moment it's excavations, it's something to do, it's ruins. And he came back and he said, I have the agreement. And they came to Women of the Wall and we said, it's not going to happen. I mean, if it happens, great, but it's not going to happen because the archaeologists are not going to allow it, and the Waqf is not going to allow it, and UNESCO is not going to allow it. You can't just build a whole plaza over the relics of the temple, of the outside of the temple. It just won't happen. And so Netanyahu, again, thanks to the pressure from North America, because that's what he cares about, more than women of the wall in Israel. He cares about the support that he's getting from here. And so what they did was they appointed a committee headed by the secretary of the government. And for once, we were invited to sit at the table as the others, with the reform movement, the conservative movement, and the federations. And we have been in discussions now for 16 months until the government fell. And there were 3 issues that we talked about. We're talking now about how to turn the southern part of the Kotel into a continuation which would enable egalitarian prayer and women of the wall to pray in their way. So the 3 issues were the financial issue, meaning what funds we would get from the state to run the place. We managed to agree on that. How it would be run, that's the technical, I would say, issue, or administrative issue. Who would be in charge? What kind of committee? We managed to agree on that. And then we came to the topographic, geographic issue. We are not willing to be the back of the bus anymore. This area has to be open and visible and welcoming, with an area that touches the wall, that people will be able to go up to the wall. And that is where we kind of got stuck, and then the government fell. So now there's a new government. Soon will be a new government. And the new government will probably have the ultra-Orthodox parties as part of the government. Now, I just want to say that this Knesset, the new Knesset, has the largest amount of women ever, 29 women members of Knesset. But the question is, how many of them will be in the coalition? Probably 13. And the bigger question will be, how many of them will be ministers or even deputy ministers? And I'm guessing 1 or 2. And that's an optimistic guess, because several of the parties don't have women at all. Shas, no women. Agudat Israel, no women. And Bennett has no women either this time around. So there are going to be very few women. We are hoping that the issue of women of the wall will not be part of the pre-negotiations for the establishment of a new government, because that would be very bad for us. And if we are not part of those negotiations, then maybe, again, if there's enough pressure, and that is why I'm here, because we need your support, we need the pressure from here to make sure that these negotiations are resumed again. Because it would be a revolution for all of us if there would be a new plaza. Now again, we're not giving up our right to pray in the women's section until this happens. And we're going to fight to be able to pray with the Torah. And we're going to think of very creative ways to be able to do that. Because this is a basic right of every woman. Now, I want to say another thing. I know that the Women of the Wall's battle has changed so many things in Israel as far as women and religion goes. A lot of Orthodox women have felt empowered by our struggle to find ways to become more central and meaningful in their own congregations. I'm talking about the modern Orthodox women, many of them very, very learned, and we see how they are slowly finding their ways to be leaders. They can't be rabbis, but leaders in different ways in their congregations. And just recently, the first woman was appointed as a a kosher, a mashgichat kashrut, as someone who's in charge of the kosher aspects of food. So I think if there's one point that I really want to get through is the fact that you have the right, the obligation, and the ability to make a difference. And I'm just going to touch on one more thing, which is connected and not connected. I am the reform movement's, one of the reform movement's representatives in the Jewish National Fund. And as your representative there, and it's really important that you vote, anyone who hasn't voted for the WZO, please take out your smartphone, do it right now. It's very important that we have representation there. Firstly, I need to tell you that the WZO has been supporting Women of the Wall because of the reform movement there that has put forward motions to support our struggle. So that's number one. And number two is that in the WZO, there are 37 members on the board. 6 of them are women. I'm one of them. I'm the representative of the reform movement. 4 are representatives of women's organizations, and 1 woman represents the conservative movement. So the only way to get women there is through you, through your vote. So this is all part of advancing women in Israel, of your ability to influence and be part of it. And I was just talking here to Cynthia? Jessica. Jessica joined us with the EIE. She was with us that day when we had the small Sefer Torah, and we were just talking about it. She showed me photographs. Very meaningful thing in your life, I presume. Strong experience. I really urge you to join us. Make your trip around Rosh Chodesh. Join us. Be with us. Men and women. The men are usually just behind us. And we would love to have you with us to be part of this really important battle. So I'd like to open up for questions and answers and comments, whatever you want to share with us.
When Lesley referenced, what Jennifer asked was, what can we do here to be most helpful? Number one that you can do right now, if you have not voted in the World Zionist Organization election, which is the opportunity for us in North America to be able to register our voices, our votes, for a particular party, which then helps us to get money allocated to our causes, then you need to do this. And we support ARTSA, which is the American Reform Zionist Association, and that's our reform movement Zionist organization. Are there other things?
Definitely, Lesley? There are other things. Firstly, join our Facebook. You know, share what's happening. Any person from Israel who comes to speak in any gathering, get up and say, what is this story with Women of the Wall? You know, we also have different projects, like, for instance, we're thinking of this project of asking everybody to take a selfie of themselves with a Sefer Torah, and then you'll be able to attach it and send it to Netanyahu. So just follow us and definitely do what's needed. Blog about us. You know, share this feeling of being discriminated against. Each one of you should have that feeling in her, that it's her who's there. We are just representing all of you when we get arrested, when we're there, when we're fighting. It's all of us doing it for a different way of worshipping at the Kotel, which is more pluralistic and more inclusive. That is what we're doing. So you can definitely be an influential in that. Follow us. If you wear a talit, get the Women of the Wall talit. You know, it's one radical act, I would say, subversive act, helping another subversive act. Very important also that sometimes I come on a Saturday to a congregation and I see so many of our talitot, and I say, okay, those are the women that support us. So that's another way of supporting us. And your trip. If you are planning a trip to Israel, plan it around Rosh Chodesh. And if you want to do a bat mitzvah with us, maybe you haven't had a bat mitzvah, or you know someone who's going to have a bat mitzvah, come and have it with us. And that way we can put pressure on the Israeli government to be able to continue those negotiations that might really revolutionize the Kotel. I want to say one more thing. There's a law in Israel that every pupil at school during their 12 years has to come to Jerusalem and the Kotel twice. And when they come, who takes them around and shows them the Kotel? Rabinovich and his people. They get to see one way of Judaism. We want to have a separate area that will be open, visible, pluralistic. And then those pupils will be able to see that there are other ways of being Jewish. And especially for women, especially for girls that come. You know, they kind of go into the women's section and the boys go into the men's section and something is done with them. You know, maybe if they are older than 12, then they'll put on tefillin. And the girls, nothing. So this has to change, and we will be able to change it.
Great. So Lisa's asked, can Lesley speak to national and legal issues in relationship to this?
In 1990, following the establishment of Women of the Wall in the beginning of the battle, there was a clause that was added into the law of the holy places, clause number 5, which is the Women of the Wall clause. And that clause says that anyone who prays at the Kotel, not according to the custom of the place, can go to prison for up to 6 months or pay a fine of 500 shekel. And that was the clause that we were arrested on, because of that clause and disturbing the public peace. So one of the things that Judge Sobel that I talked about said, he said, Women of the Wall are also the custom of the place now. 25 years. Who says that the custom of the place is only praying in the way that Rabinovich is demanding to pray? So that's a really important issue. And now a regulation is something which is less binding. It's less important legally. It's on lower on the hierarchy of legality. But even so, the guards won't let us in. If we get the Torah in, we can read it legally, but we just can't get past the guards because he is the one who is in charge of the guards. So that's the regulation.
I love with your accent. It sounds like he's the one in charge of the gods. It's great. So the question has to do with Lesley's thoughts about the root of what Risa says is the hatred of women in Israel and perhaps in Judaism.
Well, I think as far as the Judaism, you would be more qualified to talk about that.
You can deny it. You
but
can say it doesn't exist. You can have your personal response.
I'll say a word about. I'll start off with the Kotel. I think that one of the roots in the Kotel is not hatred of women, but it's a battle on territory, about territory, and money in many ways. Who does the Kotel belong to? And I think that the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, don't want to give it up. They were given the Kotel in many ways in 1967, as I said, not willing to give it up. And there's a lot of money involved. The Kotel Heritage Foundation has a budget of something like $20 million a year, or something like that, for excavations, for building, for education, for bringing the students. We're talking about a lot of money. And you know, it is the most sacred place for Jews. And thousands and thousands of people come daily to that place. Nobody wants to give it up. So that's about Women of the Wall. And maybe an anecdote, when we were in court in 1980, 1991, 1992, 1993, the Minister of Religious Affairs said, when Women of the Wall said, we only want 11 hours a year. That's not true nowadays. We want much more. But at the time, it was a tactic, I would say. 11 hours a year. Rosh Chodesh, in Tishrei, we don't go to pray at Rosh Chodesh at the Kotel. And the judge said, that doesn't seem like a big problem. The Minister of Religious Affairs said to one of the journalists, the wall doesn't want to hear women's voices sing. I know what the wall wants, and it doesn't want to hear the women's voices sing. What do you answer to something like that? You really don't know what to say. I think in so many ways, also in Judaism, it's a battle of supremacy. Who's running the show? And who gets the kavod? And who is standing on the bima? And who reads from the Torah? This is the battle. And I think it is very convenient, and was very convenient, to have the women go out to work, bring up the children, and the men study, which is what happens with the ultra-Orthodox. I'm going to tell you a little story. After one of the arrests, I got a phone call from a woman, and she said, are you Lesley? She mispronounced my name because it's not a very Israeli name, and I said yes. And she said, I'm not going to tell you my name, and I'm an ultra-Orthodox woman from, she told me where, which is a really Orthodox community. She said, I was at the Kotel, and I saw what happened, and I'm ashamed. I found your phone number, and I want to tell you I'm absolutely ashamed of what's happening there. This is not true Judaism. And I was really moved, and she phones me now and again, and we talk, and she tells me about her life. She works very hard. Her husband studies. She has several children. She's in her early 30s, and she feels in many ways trapped in that way of life. There's no way she could escape it in any way, but she would love to see change. And in the last elections, there was, for the first time, a party of Orthodox women. They didn't get many votes, but maybe that's the beginning of something new, some change coming, hopefully.
Is there any connection between birthright and the opportunity that kids have coming over to Israel then to be able to participate with Women of the Wall?
So again, this is an answer of what you can do in North America. If there was pressure on birthright to come and join us, that would be wonderful, because they don't. The EIE does, and it's great to have you. Tomorrow we have 60 kids from EIE join us. Everybody knows what EIE is. That's the 1 year.
This is our semester-long program for high school students in Israel. Just last fall, Jessica and Anya Gibbs were there. This coming fall, Jillian Giberson and Marina Mason are going. I participated in 1970. It's an extraordinary. Alice did too. Right, of course, Claire did. We've had several young people from Barnert who've participated, and it's life-changing. And they all participate with Women of the Wall.
For the last, I think, year and a half, maybe, they've been coming, and it's been wonderful. So again, pressure on whoever's organizing birthright would be wonderful, because they feel, maybe, I don't know, that it's too controversial. It's not dangerous in any way now, but there were months that it was very, very scary. Those months after Judge Sobel's decision, I told you about with the loudspeakers, they brought 6,000 Haredi girls in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, to fill up the women's section so that we couldn't go in. So we had to pray at the back. But they only did that for a few months. It was just before the local elections. And again, the Orthodox parties wanted to show how active they are. And that's, again, I need to say, it is tremendously connected to politics. So pressure on Netanyahu, that is the thing. Email him, write to him. Anyone who comes, the ambassador here, write to the ambassador. Say, what is the story with women of the wall that they can't read Torah at the Kotel? Women of the wall is us. And that means that we are discriminated against. Anything like that is a winner.
Lisa.
Just one more question on that line. So the keys to the hotel went in 67 to the chief rabbi, who was already, and then they get passed on and passed on. So does that cycle ever break?
No, the answer is the ownership of that site, in terms of the management of it and the customizing of it, is all through the chief rabbi of the wall, and that's internal, and that's the only way to change that has been through the not changing that individual, but creating a site, parallel site that
Would be under separate.
yes, under
Would
separate
be under our
jurisdiction.
I'll just say that was part of the negotiations. And that was the one part. I said that there were three parts: the financial, the administration of the new section, and we would be part of that administration. That is the women of the wall. And what's interesting, in those discussions, one of the things that we said is that we will not participate in an administration where there's only one woman representing women of the wall. It has to be more. It has to be. We have to make sure that there's several women in this committee or whatever it would, management of the new section. And all that was agreed upon. All that was ironed out. That's fine. That's behind us. Now it's only the physical aspect, where the entrance will be, how visible will it be, what will it look like. Rabinovich, who's in charge of the Kotel, the rabbi of the Kotel, he would like this new section to be hidden away with high growing trees between us. And no, we're not willing to have that at all. By the way, it would look different in general. It wouldn't be like a continuation of that plaza. There would be places going down and up. There's a Herodian road. We do not want to in any way destroy the archaeological site there. So it would be a different kind of plaza, but just like our talit is different, that's fine. It's okay that it'll be different, but it would be a place that whenever you come to Israel as a group from the temple or in any other way, you could pray together over there. You might not even want to go to the other section, which is more, fascist, like a large section. But again, we have to continue those negotiations so that things will change. And maybe as important is to try and read the Torah in the women's section. Try and think of very creative ways of getting it in. And if any of you have any ideas, come to me afterwards, because we are open to any idea. We even thought of bringing a scribe there to start writing the Torah inside. Anything that can be, can get us a Sefer Torah.
So I wanted just to offer one image. In case you haven't been convinced that this is a critical issue within the state of Israel, it's not just an issue of women praying at the wall or learning at the wall. A couple of months ago, after one of the last major snowstorms, I don't know about the end of your driveway, but mine had these mounds of snow, and because there'd been so much and it had been so cold, the mounds had frozen into ice. But the way that we had plowed the driveway, it was now really impeding our passage in and out of the driveway. So Danny was out of town. Otherwise, I'm sure he would have done this. I went to the end of the driveway with a pick and a shovel. Okay, now how did I break that up? Did I go to the center of the mound, or did I start at the edges? Right. Now, honestly, I started in the middle at the start because it was the highest part, and I thought, oh no. Very rapidly, I realized I will get nowhere. But when I worked at the edges, that mound started to break up very rapidly. It is these strong peripheral issues that may not impact all the women in Israel, but they are absolutely transformational. And when we support an issue like this, we change the culture of Israel, not just the religious expression, but the culture of Israel. And in a moment, when we finish in just a moment, I want to leave you with a midrash from Talmud Brachot that I think will illustrate why this matters to men and to women. 2 more questions.
Can I just say something about that? Just to explain how influential it is, I will tell you that one of the fashion houses in Israel, Comme il faut, feminist in a way, they called us, I think it was last winter, and they said that they based their whole collection on women of the wall. And we came to their studio, and we saw these huge photographs of us with talitot, being arrested, fighting, whatever, and how it influenced them. And another thing is that in Israel, in the newspapers, nobody was ever used to seeing women with talitot. But with all our arrests, they got used to it, So we are changing the culture in Israel. And one more thing. I asked the woman who does my nails, she's always a good seismograph for me, because she's not my circle of friends, let's put it that way. And I said to her, she has 2 little boys, and I said, when they are bar mitzvah, will you want to go to the kotel? She said, yes, all our kids go. And I said, if you have a choice of going to the men's section and standing on a plastic chair, or going to this new egalitarian section, if it will be, what would you choose? And without hesitating, for a minute, she said, I'll go to the egalitarian section. So if we have this, it will revolutionize things for Israelis as well. Most Israelis will choose to come to the new section. And we can make that happen together. There's no question about it.
How did you begin your association with Women of the Wall?
We've got to remember in 2008, I was taken on as the executive director. But I had prayed with them several times beforehand, just to support them, because I'm a feminist. I've been active in the feminist movement since I finished the army. And a lot of my activity in the feminist movement was because of my experiences during my army service, which is it's changed a bit, but one of the worst places to be for women, as far as it was, the sexual harassment was unbelievable, and there was nothing that we could do about it. There was no one to go to. And so when I finished my army service, I ran into, in a way, the feminist movement, which was very young. I was from Haifa. The feminist movement started in Haifa. And I said, oh my goodness, it's not only me. All this harassment, all this, there's a bigger picture. And suddenly I realized that I was part of a bigger picture, and I started being involved. We founded Isha Li Isha, which is still active in Haifa. It's a grassroots feminist organization. And so I felt it was my obligation to support Women of the Wall, even though I personally didn't feel the need to go every Rosh Chodesh to the Kotel. But the cause was a cause that I believed in, and so that when they needed someone, there were a wonderful group of women, but all of them very spiritual. And when it comes to running an organization, you have to do the accounts also, and you have to know how to get the books right and so on. So Anat Hoffman, the chairperson, who is a very dear friend of mine, we've done a lot of mischief together in the feminist movement, such as I tied her to a bed once just outside the police station, and while she was outside there tied to the bed speaking to the journalists, I went in to put in a complaint against the police officer who's in charge of all Jerusalem, and they couldn't understand what I wanted. And so my claim was that he is not doing enough to fight trafficking against women, And 3 months later, I was called in and I was given a briefing on what he's done in the last 3 months. So Anat and I have done a lot of good things together, and she asked me to join Women of the Wall and, help out with the non-spiritual aspects of it. And then in 2010, the first detention happened with the Sefer Torah. It was by chance. It was truly one of those things. There was no one around. It was just us. And we said, okay, instead of schlepping the Sefer Torah to Robinson's Arch, let's read it in the women's section. And within seconds, the woman who was reading was arrested. And then the next month, 2 months later, Anat was arrested. And then we started being arrested because of the talitot. So that's how things happened. And I think, again, one of the big changes that happened this time around, I mean, we've been around for 26 years. That's a long battle. But since 2010, things have changed, amongst other things, because of social media, because we managed to get our story out. Because Jessica, when she was with us, she put the pictures up. And she said, I was with Women of the Wall. And maybe she'll even blog about it. We talked about it a moment ago. But you tagged it, didn't you? You told me that you tagged it. And you're part of history now. You being there in those pictures and being right beside that tiny Torah and being part of this battle, that's being part of history. There's no question about it.
Rabbi Dan Freelander, would you please come up? So the midrash I would like to offer us as we really reflect on what Lesley is impelling us to do. There's this beautiful midrash in Brachot that says, when you face the Holy of Holies, when you face this sacred spot where the temple stood in Jerusalem, what direction do you face? So what's the answer? Well, east if you are in the west. But if you're in the west, you face east. If you're in the north, you face south. If you're in the south, you face north. So ultimately, who do you see when you face those directions? You see each other. We see one another. Now, one of the great, I think, challenges, and I would, in part, answer Risa's question this way. Shabbat morning yesterday, there was a guest here who came from an Orthodox background. He called himself the black sheep of the family, as opposed to evolved in some ways. He said to me, reform is ridiculous. It causes people to leave Judaism. I said, well, keep coming. You need to come here and to meet our young people and to meet all of the people who have come back to Judaism because of Reform Judaism and because of the opportunities. I said, but what I should have said, and I shared this midrash with him, what I should have said is, it's time to look into each other's eyes. And part of what's happened as Orthodox Judaism evolved, not Reform, not conservative, and remember, Orthodox Judaism is younger than Reform Judaism, right? Founded in the 1820s as a response to Reform. This idea of radical separation of men and women has caused us not to look into each other's eyes. And when we discriminate against anyone, ultimately we discriminate against ourselves because we diminish ourselves. We lose a sense of who we are, of the totality of humanity. And so when we fight for these kinds of rights, it's not a selfish fight. It's a fight for everyone. It's a fight to renew our vision. And that's why it's so important and can't be ignored. And that's why I asked some of you who are here for other activities today to come in, because this is not an isolated issue, it's our issue. So I asked Rabbi Freelander, as both vice president, that's from yesterday, as president of the World Union for Progressive Judaism, and as a person of an extraordinary voice, to help lead us in a prayer for Lesley and all of the women who are fighting for the rights of all in Israel and all Jews around the world. So I ask everyone to please rise. Lesley, come on over here. Danny, would you? Sorry.
May you be blessed as you go on your way. May you be guided in peace. May you be blessed with health and joy. May this be your blessing. Amen. 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 May this be your blessing. Amen. 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 May this be your blessing. Amen.
Thank you.
Lechilach. Thank you so much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.